everything seemed like it was in slow motion. And I thought, oh, we're getting hypothermia. We're about to all just go to sleep. And so I said to my friends, we got to get out of here.
Hey, this is GreenTalk. I'm Ayamade Adeolakale, and I'm here today with Victoria Redel. She's a member of the Dartmouth class of 1980 and has received fellowships from foundations from the Guggenheim Foundation to the National Endowment for the Arts. Victoria, welcome.
Thank you so much, Ayamade. So glad to be with you.
Joan Didion once wrote, I write entirely to find out what I'm thinking, what I want, and what I fear. Your work spans poetry, short stories, and novels, all circling themes of trauma and displacement. Victoria, why do you write?
Oh, Ayamade, that's such a big question. I've written all my life, and I'm not even sure I know the answer. As a kid, I loved stories. I loved to read. I loved to read. So partly it was I wanted to do the thing that I enjoyed so much. I also came from a family where there were a lot of stories. Some of those stories were partly told. Some of them were not told. So I was kind of the family snoop. I was always interested in the histories. So the notion of what is known and what is unknown, what's true and what's untrue, have always been sort of themes, not necessarily initially overt that I followed, but I think I was sniffing my way through that. And then as I became more conscious of myself as a writer, those also became themes that I pursued, plus the other piece of it, in fiction, for example, is I love the possibility of imagining what it is to step outside my imagination and into the mind of another person. So, hence characters. And in poetry, it's some sort of, I feel that in poems, I am able to obviously tap into that place within myself, but I think I tap into that place inside of myself that's part of a larger song that happens inside of poetry and sound and prayer, and that's it, part of the origin of poetry. That's a long answer to the question.
Critics have long debated how long you can separate the author from the art. You've written some of the most psychologically disturbing characters in contemporary fiction. What is your stance on this debate?
It's a good question. When my first novel, Loverboy, came out, and inside of that is a woman who, in her desire to have a really intense and special relationship with a child, takes the notion of maternal separation to an extreme. I'm interested often in the extreme. And when that book came out, they were calling me like the dark writer or something. My son saw that and said, "Are you really a dark writer, Mom?" Because my person in the world is not that dark. But I guess one of the things I love in writing, in life, I live a life as a pretty good citizen. It's an effort I make in the world to be a good citizen and to think about things. And in fiction, one of the things I've loved is to push the extremity. What happens when a certain kind of love gets pushed too far? And what are the obligations, in another sense, of secrets? Inside of a family, do we need to know all the secrets of a family, or is the greater generosity to allow a person to have things that are never revealed? And maybe those are dark subjects, but they seem to me at the heart of so many questions that regular people face every day. And regular people face subjects, concerns, or events that are difficult and dark. We look at the world now and it's filled with, I don't know how many 20 million displaced people in the world. So to write into displacement and exile, which I've done in poetry, is that an effort to be dark, or is it a gesture of love to speak about it? So I think that the things are closer than we might imagine.
So your stance is officially separate the author from the art?
My stance is there is a separation, right? I mean, we can look at authors who we love their work, and the person that they were in the world, you don't really necessarily want to hang with. So in that case, I do separate the author from the art. I'm not banning work because I don't like the maker of it. So yeah, I guess I do separate them. I guess it would have to go for me as well.
You said your writing life really began when you first had children. Loverboy, your debut novel, came directly out of that experience of early motherhood. How did becoming a mother affect your writing?
So when I say that I really feel I became a writer after I had kids, I was writing for years beforehand. I wrote, as I said before, as a child. I wrote through my years at Dartmouth. I wrote poetry. I went and got an MFA in poetry, and I was writing. But I had my first child before I was 30, and the demands of having a kid and having a job and wanting to be a writer, wanting to be an artist, I suddenly realized that my life as a writer would be the thing that would disappear unless I learned how to prioritize it. And so that is when I realized if I could lose this thing, I would lose it. And if I couldn't lose it, I had to learn how to make a place for it in my daily life and in my life in the world. So before Loverboy came out, I did have a book of poems and a book of stories. And some of the stories, the last stories that I wrote there began to explore elements of motherhood. I feel like having children has allowed me a kind of larger perspective in the world. You know, it's allowed me, and it's another gate that I've passed through, not just caring for my kids, but what's the world I want to give them? What's the stories I want to tell them? But as a writer, it partly made me a disciplined person. I didn't have time to just hang around and wait for inspiration. That was part of a big piece of it.
Do you have any advice for aspiring writers that are also trying to find some discipline?
Yeah, I do. I'm an undisciplined enough person that if I was given the choice, like in a day, if I didn't plan things out, I guess my main advice is plan your day, plan your week. I know that sounds kind of uncool and not like lying around waiting for, the muses to speak to us. But if you don't get yourself in the chair or at the desk or wherever it is you want to compose, it's not going to happen. So I think the thing to do is to have a schedule. I was going to say to you, if I have to make a choice between do I want to write or do I want to go work out, I'll often choose working out because, you go to the gym and you come out and you feel like you've done something. Frequently when I'm having a writing day, I may come out with a paragraph, which by the next day I think, well, that was terrible. That's gone. I'm going to salvage one sentence or no sentences. So, but for me, I know my rhythm enough to know that if I can, I'd like to wake up and start to write. I'd like to wake up, make my tea, get to the desk and start to work. And then a couple hours later, I can be in my life. And once I've started writing, that's the other piece of it that I would give. If you could be a morning writer and you've gotten work done, even if the work was bad, you've already started that piece of your mind moving. And so much later in the day, I might be in the grocery aisle and the word that I've been really wanting to find, there it is. It comes to me as I'm, choosing the cereal that I'm about to put in my basket.
Loverboy was adapted into a feature film in 2006, and the novel is widely considered the better of the two. What is it like to hand over your story to someone else and watch it become something different? And is there a part of you that wishes it stayed on the page?
When a writer allows their book to become a film, I think the only way to do it is to know that the piece of art that's going to be made is no longer your piece of art. I wrote Loverboy. You've read it for class. It's not immediately a book that you think, given the style of it, oh, well, this is a movie. So I didn't write it thinking about film at all. I was delighted to see what's going to happen. But I did have to think, this is no longer my work. And I learned a lot. They were extremely generous in allowing me to sort of see from not so close, but from kind of close what they were doing. I visited the set twice. My sons and I both are in the film. We're sitting behind Marissa Tomei and Kevin Bacon in the scene, and that was fun to be on the set. But no, I don't wish I didn't allow it to happen. I'm happy it happened. I also think it was really instructive. I worked very hard in Loverboy from the start of the novel to make the mother seem like a wonderful mother. I don't know how you read her in the beginning, but and to slowly have us, the reader, begin to understand that she's unraveling, or the extent of her wanting to hold the son close. And the way the movie is set up, the ordering, the chronology starts in a way in which the mother, I don't think you can help but see her as an untethered person right from the beginning of the film. And that makes for it's a different choice. So that was interesting to see.
Can you sort of give us some insight into the story? Like, when do you first get contact about, we want to make your book into a film?
Kira Sedgwick was given the book by a friend of hers, and she apparently read it and gave it to her husband, Kevin Bacon, and Kira said, I'd be really into playing that woman as a part. And Kevin, I think, was interested in trying to direct something for the first time. So they both said, hey, we'd like to option this. And so they reached out to me, to my agent, and that they optioned it. Optioning a book is like renting it, so nobody else can make it. And they optioned it for 2 years. I thought to myself, I know many people who had books optioned and nothing comes of it. So I thought, nothing's going to come of this. But sure enough, they found a screenwriter who got on board, and then they raised the money, and then they reached out and said, it's happening. And I was like, wow. And they wound up making the film on a very, very, very tiny budget. And I think that, and they wound up getting a lot of great actors to participate in the film. I think as friends or as people interested in working with Kevin and Kira. So it has an incredible cast. The first time I went to the set, two things were really cool that day. I got to the set, I was nervous, and across the way, someone was bringing me out to where they were filming, and across the way, I saw the young boy that they had cast as the son, and he looked exactly like what I had imagined, and I started to cry. I was like, wow, they really got this. So that was the first thing that was like, this is incredible. And the second thing that was moving to me was I was standing around feeling kind of shy, and a woman who had a job in the movie making, I don't know what she was a camera person or something else, came up, put her hand kind of on my shoulder, and she said, look around. And so I said, okay. She said, all of these people have this job because you wrote a book. And I thought, oh, that's nice. I'm feeding some people. That's good.
What was your reaction when Loverboy itself was getting like popular acclaim originally as your first novel?
You know, I started as a poet. I still, in my core, see myself as a poet. And books of poems currently do not come out with any kind of attention the way a novel does. They kind of move into the world quieter, which is just fun. And so with a novel, I don't know that it entered the world with huge acclaim. I'm not sure I could say that. But it got more notice than books of poems. And I was excited, and I was a little scared because, in fact, the subject matter is difficult. and I wasn't really prepared for the kinds of questions I'd be asked. Why did you choose such dark subject matter? Do you have children? And is this how you feel about parenting? I hadn't really expected the very question that you asked before. I hadn't really expected people not to be able to make the line between my life and the life I created in a book. So it was daunting. That part was daunting. Like, I was having to answer questions. And I don't think as a poet you're asked to answer questions. People are just sitting with the poem and trying to see how or what it makes them feel. With novels, people are asking you biographical questions.
Many authors say picking a favorite among their works is like picking a favorite child. Do you have a favorite work?
It is like picking a favorite child. And I'm glad for each of the books I wrote when I wrote them. I think in some ways, I just recently had occasion to spend some time with the first collection of stories I wrote, where the road bottom was out. And at that moment in time, the work was more experimental than the work is now that I write, I think. And I was really trying to understand something about how far I could go inside of a sentence. I was really, almost the technicalities of what was in a sentence, in a paragraph. Could I write a paragraph that was a page long, a sentence that was a page long? Those kinds of almost technical skills were delighting me. And as I read back on it, I think there's a chance I could have read back on it and thought, like, this is all pyrotechnics that I was going for. But I looked back and I thought, oh, I like these stories. They still resonated for me. So that's a nice thing.
Gordon Lish, one of the most controversial and demanding figures in American literature, was your fiction mentor at Columbia. What was it like being in that room with him? And how much of his lessons have you carried with you to teaching yourself?
So Gordon taught in the general studies program for maybe 2 semesters only. And I was a graduate student in poetry, and a really dear friend of mine, a fiction writer, said, you should take Gordon Lish's class. And I said, come on, I'm a poet. And she said, you should take this class, if for no other reason than you're not going to really hear anyone who's smarter talking about fiction than this man. So that was curious and interesting to me. And I took the class and started trying to write fiction. And he was a brilliant teacher. He's still alive, a brilliant man and a brilliant teacher. And when the work was good, when someone was writing well, he felt like we were speaking to God, and he could make you feel like the act of writing, when it was true, when what a writer was getting at was true, and only what they could do, as opposed to imitative, was like a gift they were giving the world. So it raised the level. He was also, it was kind of the school of tough love. If something wasn't going well, like if between sentence 4 in the start of a story and sentence 5, you made an error, and there's ways to think about what he meant by an error, like you forgot that you had said there were 2 moons in your first sentence, and by sentence 5 there was only 1 moon. And he was like, well, you've just lost the authority. Your reader won't believe you anymore. So you're going to stop there, fix it, and then go forward. And that's teaching by tough love. But I also, that way of teaching appealed to me. I grew up, my mom was a ballet teacher, and so I was surrounded by like the school of Russian ballet teachers where nobody is coddling you. You know, if your hand isn't held in the right place, they're going like that and smacking it. So that kind of praise but toughness was congenial to me. Plus, I saw writers' work leap in his room, and there are many writers that are out there writing book after book now who somehow came through either being edited or published. He also was a publisher at Knopf. He also was a publisher at Esquire magazine, a fiction editor, and many people were published by Gordon Lish, and he was a great champion of fiction. He was at Knopf, and I was writing stories, and often sending. He was an editor at Knopf, and he also at that time was an editor of a magazine called The Quarterly. And so, among other places where I would send stories to different journals, which was kind of how work was. I guess now it's the same thing, but online journals. Then it was hard, paper journals. I would often send to the Quarterly, and many of those stories he took. And then eventually he reached out and said, I'd like to publish a collection of stories, Victoria. I was thrilled, right? I was thrilled.
At 14, after spending your childhood deep in the world of ballet, you were diagnosed with a spine disease that kept you in a full body brace for 7 years. How did that change you? And do you think that experience still lives somewhere in your writing?
Wow, you did a deep dive into me. I grew up in this ballet family that I've mentioned. My mother was a ballet teacher, ballet dancer. My sister was became a professional ballet dancer and a choreographer. And I was diagnosed with scoliosis at about 13. I was put in one brace at 13 and a half. And the doctor who put me in it put it on the wrong side of my body. So I spent a half a year, we don't even count that year, in the wrong brace. And then I was put in a brace called the Milwaukee brace. And the Milwaukee brace, it's not used anymore, but it went from my neck to my pelvis. So to talk to you, I believe I'm going to do this on tape, I would be like this, right? I moved as a solid block. And I was in that brace when I got to Dartmouth. I first was in the brace for 23 hours a day. And then every 6 months, I would have an x-ray. If my spine was a little bit corrected, it'd give me an extra hour out of the brace. I continued taking ballet. So on days when I had ballet, they kind of considered ballet like physical therapy. So a ballet class is an hour and a half more than I had out of the brace. So I would take off my brace 5 minutes before class and kind of stretch and try to move. And then I could take ballet class and then have enough time to take a shower when I got home. I came to Dartmouth wearing my brace. I think at that point, when I first got here, I had 4 hours out of it, enough to, like, on a Saturday night, go out from 8 to midnight without a brace and feel like cool or whatever, dorky cool. There's always the option of not wearing the brace, right? I knew someone else who had the Milwaukee brace, and she just cheated. And I made a commitment to myself not to cheat, to wear the brace, to see. I didn't want to have spine surgery, which was another option. So that started discipline. I think, I'm swinging back to this notion that at another point, I sort of rallied myself for discipline in writing. And I think that had been already instilled. I mean, it's a little bit instilled if you grow up taking ballet, right? That's a big piece of it. If you're an athlete, that's a big piece of a life, that you're going to show up and do it. And here, I had the choice. I could either feel really sorry for myself or not sorry for myself. One thing I did is I also began doing a lot of hiking during the time period I wore my brace because, well, you throw a backpack on that, I'm already upright, but my legs could move. And so, in the wilderness, I didn't feel odd. I didn't look odd. Who was looking at me? A pine tree. So I hiked a lot with my brace. And I don't know, I think the answer is, I think it gave me a sense of discipline. I wasn't really thinking about this really until I got out of my brace, because I was just having a positive attitude. But I think it gave me a big sense of, otherness and a compassion for, for a period of time, I was the freaky looking person, right? To walk into a room, to move through a room. And then, by age almost 22, the brace was gone, right? So kind of my adolescence. And then it was like, oh, now I'm not some different creature in the world. But I'm aware of people who have had those braces and internal and external things that have to be corrected. That's a long-winded answer, and I was not prepared for you asking me that question.
Sorry.
That's okay. That's okay. But where's the part where we do the funny thing?
It's coming.
Okay, good.
There's more like.
I'm so serious.
There's more serious stuff.
One more serious one?
Two more serious ones. Okay.
You're good at this, though.
Your family history is extraordinarily rich with stories, trauma, and survival. The border of truth draws directly from your father's flight from Nazi-occupied Europe on the SS Quanza. Your mother was a passionate artist who passed away when you were only 23. How much do you think that kind of inherited history shapes not just what you write about, but the depth you're able to reach in your writing?
You are asking great questions. No, really. We can keep this in here. I've been asked questions a lot in my life by interviewers. You're a great interviewer. I have a family that spans the globe. So in the sense that my paternal grandfather was born in Poland. My maternal grandfather was born in Egypt, in Alexandria. So that's a huge history that that somehow filters through. I was born in America, and I may be the first generation. I don't know how far back we could go, but I'm the first generation that I know of that didn't have to move, that didn't have to leave a country to manage war or to be displaced for any number of reasons. So but that history, I felt like I grew up inside of. I grew up, in the suburb of New York, but there was both a notion that I was supposed to assimilate and be Miss America. I don't mean a Miss America pageant, but really American. And at the same time, I was growing up with this kind of disaster mentality in the house. Something would happen was the notion, like the traumas of, I think, my parents and my grandparents' various war experiences. It's not as if they spoke about it all the time. And I think that's true in many families. People either speak a lot. I think people who have survived things either speak a lot about them or they're very quiet. And I think both have rippling effects for a couple of generations. In the border of truth, there was so much that I didn't know of my father's family's story. And I decided I wanted to use the path of that journey. A journey story is a great story, and a journey of flight. And my father was a 17-year-old boy when bombs were dropped on Belgium, and the next morning they left in a car of strangers. And that's interesting. I think it was also, my father was a 17-year-old boy who, although it was trauma, also was interested in adventure. And he saw Brussels as a pretty provincial place. And maybe they'd get to Paris and he could be in Paris, or he could go to South America. I think the sense of adventure was also in him. And that was one of the things, I don't think I really learned it until I started trying to write the book and invent the character. And one of the great things, I think, in thinking about one's family's stories and trying to write into them and invent them. The story in The Border of Truth uses a lot of my family story, but invents things also. The spine of it is pretty much the same, but who lives, who dies is not. And that's something I asked my father permission for ahead of time. I said, I want to write this, but it's not going to be a factual history. Are you okay with that? He gave me his blessing, which was really lovely. And then one of the great things was he became one of my first pieces of research. So I would go and hang out with him and ask him questions that I would have never thought to ask my dad. Just, Dad, did you wear a school uniform? Right, because I was thinking about my character as a young boy. And I'd watch my dad, who was in his 80s at that point, be asked a question, and history moved through him. His life moved kind of through him. And the answer that came out when I asked him that was, he was kind of quiet for a moment, and then he looked up and he said, "Oh, it was so itchy." He suddenly re-embodied it. And I got to ask him all sorts of questions. Did you ever go on a holiday? I don't know. I've never thought to ask my dad or my mom that question. And he smiled and he told me, and I said, "Well, what'd you do? What'd you do there?" And he said, "Well, there were a bunch of kids." And I said, "Who?" And suddenly I was learning about my dad's first kiss. And I was like, really? And it was so fun, that piece of understanding a parent in a different way.
You worked as an addiction counselor in hospitals before returning to New York for your MFA. Why were you drawn towards this profession? And what parts of the experience do you think have stayed with you?
You really have done your research. It's kind of a funny story in a way. It's a little bit of a Dartmouth story. I finished I got my degree, and I decided to move down to Western Massachusetts, where one of my friends, another Dartmouth grad, was already living, and they were living in a house where a bunch of us could live, and the rent was going to be $65 a month. So I figured I could find a job where I could pay that. And I went down to the town, and I looked in the newspaper, which is sort of how you found jobs then. I looked in the help wanted section, and there were 2 jobs listed that caught my eye. One was for working with troubled adolescents in a school, and I'd had some experience. I'd had a Tucker Fellowship. Do they still exist?
I'm not sure.
Well, there were Tucker Fellowships, and I'd had one and worked in a high school in Boston and Cambridge. So I had worked with adolescents, and I led some hiking trips and stuff like that, in my braids, by the way. And so I applied for that job. And the other job was in a women's halfway house for recovering alcoholics. And the job was to be a counselor, meaning, like a therapist. And I applied for that. I had 0 experience. I was 21 years old. And I somehow wrangled my way into convincing them to interview me, which they did. And more ridiculously, I got the job. I actually got both jobs. And I thought, well, I don't know anything about this world, so let me learn something. As kids, I felt like I had a handle on what it was going to be like working in a school with troubled adolescents. And gratifying as that would be, I decided, let me learn something else, and let me understand this. I didn't have really any knowledge of the disease of alcoholism. I began to learn about it on the job. The halfway house had very specific set rules. So that was helpful, because my job was to help these women adjust to the house, live with sobriety, go to meetings, eventually start to look for work, and kind of regain the skills of living sober. And I think my only skill was I was empathic. I could listen. So, and they were such likable women, and trying to get their lives right. So who wouldn't want to help them? After 2 years there, I had by then taken, Massachusetts had certification in alcoholism counseling. So I'd gotten my state certification. This is where Dartmouth comes in again. And I applied, I was going to live in Cambridge, and I saw in the newspaper a job as an outpatient clinician at a hospital in Concord, Massachusetts. So I applied for that job, but you needed an MSW for the job. But I got an interview. So I went to my interview, and the woman said to me, "Do you want to know why I'm interviewing you?" I said, "Because I'm so capable and I have state certification in alcoholism counseling." By this point, I didn't feel like a fraud. I felt pretty good. And she said, "Well, no, I'm interviewing you. I can't hire you because you need an MSW, but I'm interviewing you because at Dartmouth, you won the Adelbert Ames Award in painting, and that's my father-in-law. And I just wanted to meet whoever won the award." So I said, "Well, that's crazy. Hi, but now that I'm here, why don't you interview me? Because you might as well. I've come all this way, and let's have a conversation." And I got the job, despite not having an MSW. And I really loved, so those are the stories of how I got into it. I loved working with people, and I loved the incredible hard work it is to reorganize a life as a person gets sober. I mean, it's a tremendous opportunity. It was so humbling to be part of that work with different people. I had one client, a young man who was maybe 11 when he first started drinking at a lot. And so he was now a man a 30-year-old man who had really no experience sober, had barely gone to a grocery store sober. And so everything was like learning new, and to try to slowly walk with a person as they reform themselves in the world, it's an honor and a privilege. I thought that there was a good chance that was the work I would continue as a writer, like that I would have that as my job. But I didn't really like social work school. I sort of gave it a try when I was a teaching fellow at Columbia. I could take free classes, and I started the social work classes, and I thought, "Oh, these are kind of boring. I don't think I want that." And I wasn't ready to go the route of becoming a psychologist or a psychiatrist. So I became a professor instead.
Okay, now to the less serious question.
Great. Poured my life out to you, man. You're good at this job.
Did you like winters at Dartmouth?
I know you don't. There's no problem with weather and being outdoors in it if you have the right clothes to keep you warm. I took up cross country skiing when I came here, and that was really fun. And I was saying to you that we would put our skis over at Sanborn, work, study for a while, and then take a late afternoon into the early evening cross country ski across the golf course and down into the woods, and then come out and go to Thayer for dinner. And that was so beautiful. So yeah, I did one really foolish camping trip in negative 15-degree weather out to one of the huts, and we had to ski back because we had to ski back in the middle of the night because we would have all had hypothermia and died. It was crazy.
Writing novels is better than writing poetry. True or false?
False.
What's your favorite thing to do in Hanover?
Oh, walk. I took a walk around Ockham Pond as soon as I got here.
Best food in Hanover?
Oh, I don't know. I lose probably.
Foco was better in the 80s. True or false?
Oh, the Commons? Yeah. It just started then. It had just begun.
Oh, it wasn't a dining hall before, right?
No,
he had just started.
We had Thayer, and then the Commons was just opening. That was the work of a friend of mine who wanted to have a meeting place for students, and it didn't have food originally.
Was it better in the 80s?
No, it's probably better now. It's probably better now.
What was your favorite?
The music was better in the 80s.
What was your favorite study spot at Dartmouth?
I had two. I loved Sanborn. I love Sanborn. I love tea at Sanborn. Do they still do it? 4 o'clock tea. It's great. It's really cool. I felt so cool at that. And I spent a lot of time in the art studios. So the art studios.
What are 3 things that make a great writer?
A willingness to revise, being open to appreciating and loving the world, the stories in the world, and a willingness to go into themselves and not try to sound like anyone but themselves, acknowledging their own oddity.
Did you do a first year trip?
I did. I loved it.
What was your first year trip?
We hiked somewhere in the Whites. I don't remember exactly the path, but today one of my friends who I met on my first year trip is meeting me up in Hanover, and tomorrow we're gonna go take a hike.
What are your favorite 3 books?
I hate that question. No, truly, I hate that question because I can't play that game because I love so many books, and my favorites have changed over time. You know, I could say when I was little, I loved everything that AA. Loved the poems of A.A. Milne. Christopher Robin had Sneasels and we, you know, I loved Harriet the Spy. I think when I was a kid, I had favorites, but I read a lot of books, and there's so much that I'm in awe of. So I'm not answering that one. I'm punking out on you.
That's funny. Dartmouth was the second to last Ivy League school to admit women, only making that change in 1972. You arrived just 4 years after they made this change. What was it like being in a school that was just figuring out how to be coeducational?
That transition was really difficult. And I came back to 25 years of Women at Dartmouth kind of reunion, and Mary Kelly, who had been a history teacher and now was a dean, spoke about those years as, you know, they called them the difficult transition years. I don't think we were thinking that, but they were rough. You know, you would have professors. I remember being in a class where we'd come into the lecture hall, and the professor would say, "Good morning, gentlemen and girls." And eventually a couple of us went up to the professor and said, "Professor, would it be possible for you to, if you're going to welcome us into the room and address us, and you're going to say gentlemen, could you at least say gentlemen and women or gentlemen and ladies?" And he just rebuffed us and said, "Oh, if I have to think about all these things all the time, it's going to drive me crazy. I might as well not teach here." You know, that it didn't feel like a big ask. Or the alumni were having so much trouble with the transition, and I think that got somehow filtered down to certainly not all the men at the school. There were, as always, wonderful people at this school, but there was a kind of environment that there were nights walking up, people walking up from frat row, people being drunk and singing "Knick Knack Paddywhack, Send the Bitches Home." And you know, you're walking with your friends back to your dorm. That's just not great. And it took a while for it to go away. It took a while. It was a great place to develop a feminist consciousness.
You said in the past that using up the body is an important part of your life, especially through hiking. Is that a mindset you developed before, during, or after Dartmouth?
I grew up in a ballet family, so the body already is an important piece of, in that case, artistic expression, but it's also a discipline, which we've spoken about, and then for me, being in the woods, being in the mountains, that's my cathedral, that's my church, that's my temple, and to have a place where both body and mind are so they don't feel separated for me at all. That's a gift. And Dartmouth was a great place to do that. You know, to go down to the river and get in a boat, or to go down to take a trip on a weekend and go hike with friends. To go to one of those cabins that we can all rent all the time and go have fun. Even after being at Dartmouth, I continued to do that with friends. So Dartmouth definitely influenced my love of the outdoors. And I came up here and noticed how many kids are athletic in this school. It's so cool. It's great.
Your newest novel, I Am You, is set in 17th century Amsterdam and centers on a female painter trying to break into a male-dominated space. You graduated from Dartmouth with a degree in visual arts yourself. How much did your own background in that world shape your writing of this book? And what drew you to telling this particular story?
I wanted several years ago, 20 years ago, I had an experience that made me think I wanted to write a book about paint. I was no longer really painting, but I spent a lot of time after I thought about that reading about paint, the paint trade, how paint was made. I became kind of obsessed with it in a great way. But I couldn't figure out the book that I wanted to write, and I let it go. And then 20 years later, I encountered this very unknown or little known now painter, Maria von Oosterwijk, who in her time was well regarded, even though she was not allowed to be a member of the male guild. And the question of forgotten painter, of being able to use that question of ambition, her ambition, and also more importantly, who was Goethe? Goethe Peters had been brought into that family as a servant, and then became Maria's paint preparer, her assistant, and then a painter in her own right. And it's Goethe's story that really intrigued me. You know, what would be that arc, that change in let's say class, even from servant to artist, who now moves in circles with the important names of the Dutch Golden Age, scientists, discoverers, merchants, the wealthy. And so Goethe, that question, which is, it's not a question only of the 1600s, it's a contemporary question as well. And also, what happens when a person develops the consciousness of themselves as a painter and or as an artist. But it was really fun having, trained as an artist here, and to bring to bear that love again into the writing. I got to live again in the world of artists, and I love that.
Do you have a specific Dartmouth story that you'd like to share?
Here's one quick story. So it was Winter Carnival weekend, and we decided we weren't in the mood to be around Hanover at Winter Carnival that year. And the 5 of us rented a cabin that we could drive to the trailhead, cross-country ski about 3 miles into the cabin, and then we figured we'd hang out for the night and maybe the next day and then ski back. But there was a cold snap, and it was one of those incredible cold snaps that was, there was tons of snow, but it also was, 6 below, but with a wind chill factor, it brought it down to 25 below or something ridiculous. And so there were 4 of us, 4 women and 1 guy. The guy was a wonderful guy, probably the least experienced with outdoor stuff, but very gallant. He was a friend of ours who was originally Peruvian, and he had as his sleeping bag, one of those sleeping bags that has cowboys on it. It's made of cotton, and you get it. It wasn't even a down sleeping bag. So we all ski out, and it's freezing. The place has a wood stove, and we're trying to get it going. We cook our dinner. We cook spaghetti. Literally, our forks are freezing in the spaghetti as we're trying to eat, and we can't get warm. We don't really have the proper gear. But one of the friends, her boyfriend was leading an outward bound trip at the same time, and she had this sense that he was out there, and so she had to stay out there. And then our friend Juan was like, I'll do whatever you want to do. I would want to stay out here, but I'll go with the ladies if you feel like you have to go home. So finally, there was just a point that we were in this unheated, vast, it was a big cabin too. And I was trying to walk across the room, and suddenly everything seemed like it was in slow motion. And I thought, oh, we're getting hypothermia. We're about to all just go to sleep. And so I said to my friends, we got to get out of here. My other friend said, we got to get out of here. And then, so we all took our boat, and we kind of threw all the dirty spaghetti stuff in a bag skied out with it during the night. And the car we had to go home in was a truck that had an open back. So we decided we were going to, we put Juan, who had been so like, I'm only doing this because you ladies want to go. We threw him in the back of the truck. He was so brave, we were going to make him go back to Hanover and really freeze his butt off. And we got back. And during the night, we were all waking up. We got into beds, and we were all waking up with our limbs like tingling with frostbite. So we lived through it. We lived through it, and we loved recounting it. Both our bravery and our stupidity.
I'm going to read to you some hot takes. So you get to say your opinions on them. Okay. You can't write a good novel in 6 weeks.
I couldn't. Maybe people have done so. I think people have done so, but I couldn't.
Every author secretly Googles themselves daily.
No way. No.
Writing in coffee shops is performative.
For me, it would be. But I know some writers who write in coffee shops. But I would feel too, uptight.
People should only read physical books.
I love physical books. But I admit I read on my iPad too. When I travel, there's nothing like it. So people should only read physical books, including me.
A book that makes you comfortable has failed.
Wow, great question. Depends how we're going to. I'm not going to give you an easy answer on that, but it depends how we determine comfortable. If comfortable is a kind of awe, there are books that are beautiful, and so they're not going to dark subject matter, and I'm brought into something beautiful about what it is to be alive on the earth or the human spirit. That's a good thing. That's happiness, right? So yeah, I think books can do that.
Writers are always writing about one thing, no matter how many books they publish.
Yeah, I think probably we don't get to pick our obsessions, and they linger with us, whether we like them or not.
Book prizes reward safe, predictable risk-taking.
I'm not such a fan of book awards. I don't think they always prize the acceptable and the safe. I think there have been some awards that have done brilliant jobs of awarding books.
Writing workshops do more harm than good to young writers.
No.
You want to elaborate?
I'm sure there are some that stink, but I think there's so much of the craft that can be learned, and I think a writing workshop can encourage a writer to get to the stories they need and want to tell, and help a writer say, I don't have to sound like anybody but myself. I can find this story. So I think a writing workshop that encourages and teaches and exposes writers to great writing that they can learn from, I think they're great.
Writer's block is just procrastination.
Yeah, I'm not a big fan of believing in writer's block. I think writer's block is a kind of procrastination and also a perfectionism. And you just have to bust your way through it. You have to write badly to write well.
The best writing advice is to ignore all writing advice.
That's probably true.
Listening to an audio...
Except for my advice.
Listening to an audiobook doesn't count as reading the book.
I feel that way. I have a lot of friends who feel that listening to an audiobook is its own amazing experience. I don't think it's the same as reading a book on a page at all.
Books should be spotlessly clean after you read them.
No way, mark them up. Passages you love, put Post-its all through your book. It's yours to have a relationship with.
Do you think that's a more popular take among authors? But most authors want their books to be written, and I'm like,
I don't know. I think some people want it really clean and pristine, but it's yours. You've gone somewhere with that book. You love passages. you've been annoyed with a character at a certain moment. That's yours to write. Why'd they do that? Or, oh my God, this is the most beautiful passage. I can't wait to read that to my friend, my mom, my, whomever. So-and-so has to read this.
You can't truly read more than one book at a time.
I read it. I've been that way. I think you can read different kinds of books at the same time. But when I'm reading a novel, I'm in that world. But I could be reading a novel and then also be reading a history book if I wanted to, or a philosophy book. So I think you could do that. But in terms of reading a piece of fiction, I want to lose myself in that world.
Is your genre of fiction your favorite genre of fiction?
Yeah. I mean, I would say it's literary fiction, which I think spans a lot of kinds of fiction. I think there are literary fiction writers who also use elements of crime, or they use, fantasy or magical realism. So, yeah.
In such a technical world where most people are so pressed for time, what role do you think reading still plays?
I hope reading still plays a huge role in our lives for forever. I mean, I think you watch a little kid start to read and lose themselves in a story. You watch a little kid begin to learn the words of a Dr. Seuss story, and they can repeat it, and they love the rhythms of it, and they want to hear it over and over again. And then a young person begins to read a book and love those characters and find a kind of magical world that they can lose themselves in. When we read, we lose ourselves from this world into that world. And that experience of having a relationship with characters on a page, of having to go through characters' trials, tribulations, loves, problems, brings us deeper into our own. And getting quick flashes of things, I'm sure there are benefits to that. I mean, I look at my media all the time, but it takes me away. It takes me away from deeper conversations. The question of technology is a huge one, right? We could spend a whole other hour talking about it. How much do people looking at their phones or texting each other take away from a conversation between two people? Are we going to lose that? Well, are we going to lose books? I don't believe we will. I believe, I in my classrooms, I'm always asking students, what do you read? What do you love? And kids are always, oh my God, that book changed my life. Well, and Instagram hasn't changed someone's life. Scrolling on your phone doesn't change your life. A piece of music can change your life. A novel can change your life. A painting can change your life. But that's an engagement with art. And I think we are made fuller and better by that, in a way that technology can do lots for us, but not that.
How important do you think it is for writers to read?
Essential. Key. That's, we for one thing, we learn by seeing how other people did it and then wanting to overtake that. Or, when I teach a story in a class with my writers, I come out of it saying, okay, you may not have liked the story, but what would you beg, borrow, and steal from this? What is something that the writer is doing that you noticed that you really like? And sometimes someone says, well, what I really like is just their use of sentence fragments. I didn't know I could do that. I thought everything had to be grammatically perfect. I'm gonna allow myself to do that in a story. Well, if they hadn't read that story, they wouldn't have found it. It doesn't matter if they like the story or don't like the story, but there's so much to learn from. We wouldn't expect a tennis player never to watch, I don't know, Nadal play tennis, right? We wouldn't expect a tennis player not to watch videos of the Williams sisters playing tennis. We'd expect it because not that they're going to be them, but they're going to see something about the way you tried something with a shoulder or an arm or a grip. Same thing.